first off, I want to start off by thanking each and every one of you. It has been a long time goal for me to come to Montreal and speak to some of the amazing organizations that are doing outstanding work. JCF Montreal came to me and said, "Hey, I saw this video on YouTube. Would you mind doing it again?" And I said, "Okay, tell me a little bit about what you're trying to do here." And the first thing that they said was build capacity. And I think the idea of building capacity and making sure that each organization that is doing amazing work has the ability to connect and talk to donors in a way that will move them to action. So with that in mind, I want to start from a place of gratitude and thanking every single one of you for not only being here, but trusting me with helping to build a story that you're willing to share, not only with your donors, but your trusted network. I'm going to ask that this is a safe space. If you choose to share something, let's keep it in the room. But let's try to build each other up so we feel confident and we feel like we are building capacity not only for our organizations, but ourselves as we move through doing some of the great work we're doing. So, I was never great in school, so I love putting together a lesson plan where other people are going to be a part of it. So thank you. But our lesson plan for today is understanding and accessing our own why. You know, we talk a lot about why, but operating from a place of authenticity, there is no better movement. There is nothing that feels easier. There is nothing that makes us more passionate. So if we can make sure that everything that we're doing is harnessed in that why, we can make sure that we're achieving things that are meaningful to us and our community. We're going to talk about something called a generosity portfolio, a financial portfolio. Don't worry, I'm not going to bring numbers into this. I'm not a huge number person. I want all the feels to keep going. And we're going to talk about mindful money archetypes. This part here is something that I became really passionate about when I married the world of my financial literacy with the understanding of what it takes to be a great gift planner, what it takes to be a great donor relations manager. And then we're going to actually talk about building a story. I know that all of you are busy professionals. I know that you have many things. Some of them are off the side of your desk. So I want to give you time to actually take a moment, reflect, and actually maybe put something on paper that you can start building upon. The mechanics of a perfect story. Has anyone ever heard of Good Works? They're based out of Ottawa. So one of my mentors and a good friend is Fraser Green, and we've been talking about how to build a story for the last 5 years. We work with advisors, we work with professionals like yourself, and we actually work with donors. So some of the research that we've done and some of the actual tactics that we've used, I've actually put in front of you in a workbook. So big thanks to Fraser. But I hope we can actually use this and put things forward. And your next steps. If you don't know where to go, I'll try to help you. So as some of you may know, I've worked at the Donor Motivation Program. I'm a partner there for the last 10 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit of what makes me qualified to be up here. The Donor Motivation Program has actually had the opportunity from coast to coast to talk to thousands of donors. And when they come in to talk about their financial portfolio and how to give, they never sit there and say, okay, I'm going to give $3,000 to this organization. They always start with the why. Why is this organization important to me? So the Donor Motivation Program has really had the opportunity to inform a lot of our key understandings of what donors actually look for and how to give. And these are some of the organizations that I'm with. AMREF Health Canada, which is actually one of the largest providers of medical aid in sub-Saharan Africa. Mars, which is the Discovery District that works with social enterprises. Has anyone ever heard of the Toronto Foundation and this unique program that they did called Vision 2020? It was a really cool program that they did where they brought 50 or maybe even 100 of young philanthropists in the city, and they walked them on a 2-year learning journey of what it actually means to be a responsible donor and with some of the pressing issues that are going on in our city. But you know, all of the other stuff is cool, kind of gives you credentials, but this is what really matters, at least to me. This is my why. I was a little bit younger there. It's me, about 2 years old. My dad would say that's him when he had a full head of hair that his girls didn't take away from him. But really, I look at this picture and I instantly am reminded of why I'm standing on this stage today. When I was 12 years old, my parents decided to take me, my brother, and my sister to Pakistan. We went for a month in January. We packed up, because keep in mind, back then it was maybe 93, 94. We didn't have Kindles, we didn't have iPads, so we literally had to bring our textbooks in our luggage. And so we get there, this is the first time I'm meeting any of my dad's family. We're in this house, I'm meeting cousins on cousins on cousins and having the best time of my life. One day my mom says, okay, enough of playing with your cousins, we're gonna go to the market. She wanted to buy jewelry. And so my brother, my sister, me, my dad, our cousins all pack up in these cars and we head into the market. We head into town. Up until that point, we had been living in our cousins' and our aunts' houses that were beautiful. We had not really experienced what it was to be in a country like Pakistan as yet. And I remember sitting in the car and seeing children on the street on a Tuesday in the morning begging. And it was something that I had never seen before because I was privileged, I was fortunate that I grew up here in Canada. First generation Canadian. I was one step removed from that. But that didn't really mean anything to me at the age of 12. I just didn't understand it. And so I turned to my mom and I asked the question, why aren't they in school? My mom turned to me, that's just the way it is here. And I actually thank her now for answering the question that way, because it fueled this need to understand why there was so much inequality in the world, and I didn't know where it came from until I reflected on it 20 years later. So with that story, we all have our why. We all have what we're grounded in. Has anyone ever seen this by Simon Sinek? Raise a hand. Come on, let's get a little participatory. Come on. Yes, so it's the idea, we have to be centered in our why. Then we can understand how we go about it, and then we can choose the tactics that let us do that. So this is where I'm going to ask you to be a little vulnerable with me. If everyone can close their eyes, and if everyone can take a minute and go back to whatever moment they can think of that reminds them of why they started on this journey in the charitable sector. Whether you're a donor today, whether you understood that there was a moment that you wanted to correct, if you can just take a deep breath and sit with that for a minute. Everyone got it? All right, so open your eyes, if you so choose. Free country and all. So if I can ask everyone to think of the one word that describes their why. Is there one word that you can think of that really describes why you're sitting there? I know it's hard. I know that we want to give novels. I know that it's really hard to think of one word. But the reason why I ask this, has anyone ever participated in Slido before? Great. So I thought, what a great way to start for us to create a word cloud together, for us to move from a point of togetherness. So if everyone can pull out their devices and you can either grab this QR code at the top by zooming in, or you can go to slido.com and put in that code. And as you can see, it'll start to kind of populate if we have more than one participant. And so what I'm going to do with this is I'll send it around to everyone in this room today so we can make sure that we are reminded of our story and our why. So if everyone just takes the minute, whether you want to take a picture, I believe that this will be posted in a couple of weeks. Shirley has told me that it will be, but if you want to take a picture of this, it's pretty powerful. I keep something like this on my desk just to be grounded in the fact that I'm part of a community that's larger than myself. So let's move into this. When I talked about a generosity portfolio, this is something that is near and dear to my heart. I will stamp my feet. I will sing to whichever God we may choose to about how important this is. A donor's generosity portfolio is made up of a multitude of things. This is hard to see, so I'm just going to read it out. We have volunteerism, charity events, charitable donations in cash, estate planning, donor advised funds, insurance, appreciated securities. These are all of the ways that a donor can participate in your organization. And donors are complex. They participate in a multitude of things. So as we move through this, I really want everyone to sit with it and understand that just because someone is talking about volunteerism today doesn't mean that they can't talk about insurance or vice versa. So how can we engage our donors? The other element that I want to talk about is a donor's financial portfolio. I hesitate to ask this question, but I'm going to do it anyways. How many of you have talked to a donor about a specific type of gift? They go over to talk to their financial advisor, accountant, or lawyer, and they come back and they have a completely different way of achieving that gift. Has that ever happened to anyone? Yeah. Did you just say all the time? How do you feel about that? No. So the thing is that when we talk about this, I always say that donors are clients and clients are donors. People tend to forget that these are one and the same people. So what happens is that there's a disconnect that's happening. And so as we move through this, I talked to some really great organizations that were either in the middle of a capital campaign, that are establishing planned giving campaigns. I really want you to understand that these two elements they're always constantly moving together. And the really great opportunities for donors to give happen when these are layered. The other element that I want to talk about really quickly is mindful money archetypes. Has anyone ever heard anything like this? Yeah, I see a few heads. So again, it's a little hard to see, but I'm just going to talk about these 8 archetypes because these are also really helpful when you're talking to a specific person about how they give. And this is really important too about how we craft stories and about how we tell to move people to action. So we talk about the romantic type of money archetype. So this is a person who loves spending money on themselves and others because it makes them feel good. Budgeting feels restrictive. I don't know if but I've been there a couple of times. Especially I just got a house. It's been a challenge. The ruler is invested in making money and working hard to do so, thriving on innovation and creativity. The accumulator, we have a lot of these. In our portfolio, we deal in the private wealth space. So our bread and butter is really working with women who are on their own. And I can tell you that we look at women's portfolios and they have way more than enough, but they're still worried about feeding their cat. And so the accumulator is a real thing. And so how we approach them giving and how we approach the idea that they do have enough and that conversation and that story changes because they need to always be secure in the fact that they have something for tomorrow. So the accumulator loves to create safe financial stability for themselves. They will deny materialism and aim for long-term goals. The innocent may be overwhelmed by money. They will look to others to manage it for them, and they do not want to deal with it. The celebrity uses money for status. They buy to be part of a social experience and be perceived in a certain way. The nurturer loves to give and spend on others. And it is important to them to show their care through their spending. They are committed to others and want them to thrive. The connector, people and connection are the most important thing to them. And they use money in the name of connection to build community. The maverick is the risk taker and is often seen in pushing limits. Entrepreneurs are often mavericks. I will self-admit that I fall into the maverick category. It is really challenging for some people that are close to me. So if we can all just take a quick look at this, there is an actual test that you can do that I can also send around after that will tell you who you are in a more concrete way. But if you had to just pick, which money archetype are you? So we're going to go back into Slido and just see who we're dealing with in the room. The nurturer is not surprising at all for this room. It is absolutely not surprising that this is the line of work that everyone's chosen to do. Okay, so why do I say that this is really important, understanding the archetypes? So when we consider the financial portfolio, the generosity portfolio, the archetype, this is how we determine how a donor can have impact through the stories that we tell. This whole premise came out because I was sitting with advisors. And for those of you who are familiar with the CAGP, the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, they do a lot with financial advisors. And there was a report that came out a few years ago that said 91% 91% of advisors believe that they're having the philanthropic conversation. 13% of clients remember having that philanthropic conversation. So there's a disconnect. And so I thought to myself, when I ask advisors within my own network how they have broached the subject of philanthropy with their clients, how they've gone about doing it, they're like, oh, I look at the tax return. And it can be $200. But that $200 can be gold if you ask the right questions. So because we're storytelling, I'm going to tell a story of a donor. So this is Toronto, I'd say in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe a little bit before that. And it's about a woman who was working like most immigrant women were doing. She was able to come to Canada, start working to bring the rest of her family over. She had 6 brothers and sisters, and they all ended up coming over. But to do that, she had to work at a hotel called the Holiday Inn, which I'm told back in the 80s was a really great happening place in Toronto. Not so much anymore, but when they were telling me the story, I was just like, okay, I'm going to take your word for it. So we're sitting there, and they're telling me this story about how this woman had worked, and she had started to siphon away money. And there was a lot of tension that was happening in the home country. And so they wanted to bring everyone, but she was short for 2 members of her family. So she's in the back kitchen at the Holiday Inn, kind of just pitter-patting, talking to her girlfriend, as women do, telling them about their angst, and kind of goes about her business, doesn't think anything of it. The next day, the manager pulls her in, and there is an envelope, which is roughly now about $1,897.18, but don't quote me on that. But that's how much money was sitting in an envelope for her, enough to bring the last 2 members of her family over. And so what that did is it brought a doctor in Saskatoon, it brought a web developer over, it brought one of the leading oncologists in Chicago over, it brought a professor over. It brought, I believe that was a veterinarian. It brought a lawyer. This is now in London. It brought a human rights lawyer over. And it brought a financial consultant over. That is what $1,897.18 did. So when advisors aren't looking at the tax return and asking those questions, I want to shake them. Storytelling is so important because that $200 can unlock so much of potential, not only for that donor, but our communities. So the ripple effect is always more than we'll ever know. But how do we move them to action, right? We all have these great stories. If you haven't yet, please write this down. Start a story bank. Your stories don't have to be your stories. You don't have to live them. But if you hear a great story within your organization, write it down. And until you are able to have those stories, use your associates, use your colleagues. It's a great tool. It's not inauthentic. You can give the accolade to someone else, but creating community is a really great thing. So one of the things that the JCF really got me going on, which I was really excited about capacity building, was that a lot of times I sit in these granting rooms. Has anyone ever sat in a granting room before? Where organizations come in and they have to pitch you on their impact. A lot of these times, these are grassroots organizations. A lot of these times, these are grassroots organizations that are the individuals wearing a multitude of hats. And it is really hard to convey your story in those moments. And the problem with that is that a lot of the people who have the ability to grant write have had the experience, the training, and the professional development to tell their story. So their expectations are misaligned with what the ability is of the person in front of them. And sometimes they can't ask the right questions because they can't relate to the story that's being told to them. So that was one of the things that I was really, really passionate about when we're talking about donors and storytelling. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the mechanics now. I'm going to try not to put you asleep. If you are, raise your hand. We can move faster. So when I'm talking about what is the most complex object in the universe. Does anyone know? I think I heard it. Right? There is just so much that we don't know. Humans are not ideally set up to understand logic. We are ideally set up to understand stories through the cognitive scientist Roger C. Schenck. We are built on stories. It is in our DNA. That is how we can compile and process information. We have the executive state, the prefrontal lobes. What can I learn from this? You need to be completely safe and calm to be able to process this way. The emotional state, I've been there a couple of times. You can feel your ears getting hot. You feel everything rising. You know, am I loved? Am I someplace that I feel emotionally safe? And then the survival, the fight or flight, you know, that place in your chest where you can't concentrate because you're nervous. We want to live in the emotional state. We want to live in the emotional state when we're talking to our donors, because when someone feels something, they move. Has anyone ever heard of Dr. Russell James? Great, that's really good. So he actually went through, and he really focuses on legacy giving, but it's also been done in other categories as well. He really focuses on what happens when you talk about data points, and then when you talk through giving those data points through stories. So on this side of our picture here, you can see that when someone's being relayed a story through data, those are the only two activation points in the brain. When we look over here, we can see how it's lit up. These are all of the things that are activated when you are telling a story to someone, trying to get across the same points through the data. So when we're going through this, there is science behind why we tell stories. There is science behind why it hits differently, and there is science behind why people get more motivated. So if everyone can grab their workbook, did everyone come in here with a story that they wanted to craft? Is there something that we want to dive in with? And I only ask that. You can take a couple of minutes right here and just ask yourself, what story is going to be beneficial? Creating your story as it relates back to your organization is really important. So if you don't know where to start, I would start there. If you think about the one action, so whether you be in a capital campaign, whether you want to communicate what your organization does, who you are, all of those things, what is the one action? So if we were to say, okay, I'm going to have a conversation with X, do I want them to leave feeling that they know more about the organization? How do I want them to follow up? What is to give? I would say, you want them to become a donor, but I don't want to be that brass, but thank you for the participation. So if you want to say, I heard $1 million gift, we can put $1 million gift up there. We are going to do an interactive shop where we talk about something, then you go and work on it. You talk about something, and then you go and work on it. Because one of the big things that I was hoping for as we moved through this was that we were able to walk away with something that you could go back to your desk with that would lead you to a bigger conversation and help guide you as you move through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about each of these elements, as you can see in the workbook, a little bit, and then we're going to break out into the tables that you're sitting at to work on it. And I'll be floating around if you have questions or you want to dive in a little bit deeper. So if we talk about the steps to the perfect story, we want to talk about your protagonist, the principal character of your literary work, the leader, the champion. Who is at the center of this story? We all thought about our perfect story. If we think back to the story about the woman who was given that 1,000 some odd dollars, that was our protagonist. Who's going to be your protagonist? And when you think about your protagonist, we want to think about who your audience is. So when you're deciding on whose voice you're going to use, who is your audience? Is it charity professionals? Is it donors? Is it clients? Really be mindful of who your audience is. What will your protagonists identify most with when it comes to the audience? Where have you been a leader? Where have you been a champion? Where have you been a hero? And where have you overcome odds if you're the person that's going through it? Or, if the protagonist has been a leader, a champion, or a hero, or overcome odds. It can be a great donor story. It can be anything. So when we think about our audience, we have to make sure that we're identifying it with a specific type of champion, hero, overcoming odds, because everyone loves to be able to champion something. You want her eyes to become your eyes. You want her journey to become your journey. So when the protagonist is experiencing something, you want to be that protagonist. You want the donor to be the protagonist. You want the charity professional. You want the client. Whoever your audience is, you want them to be able to see the story through the eyes of the protagonist. If the protagonist is the main character, what events in your protagonist's life have shaped the character they are today? So any details you can give to color in the protagonist, you might not use all of these in your story, but this is really just to give a little bit of a character building exercise. Let's use this time to come up with an idea that you want to leave today with. So, back to our workbook. So there was a couple of things that were mentioned, and I just want to touch up on them, and these are why these tables are so great. There was an element of, hey, don't look at my sheet. We haven't written anything down. That's fine. Talk. This is great. You know, sometimes the best ideas happen while you're walking your dog. So as long as you're ruminating on it, as long as you're talking, I'm looking at that table, so thank you. This is just a really healthy exercise to talk about the different ways that people can tell their stories. And sometimes getting out of your organization and hearing another organization's story allows you to envision it in a different way. Joel asked the question, you know, this is great, but we really want to know how the donor, we really want to know the donor's why and their story. Karina said, yeah, you know, when I ask the donor, they'll just say, you know, my grandkids or something like that. And a lot of the times you have to tell your story and mimic the things that you would hope that they would share to you. So this is a really healthy exercise in being vulnerable enough to be able to share your story so the donor feels comfortable enough to share theirs. So maybe the flip side of this, if Shirley wants to have me back later, is talking about how to pull a story out of a donor, because we do that all the time with our clients. Our clients will be like, well, my grandkid asked. Cool, but you have 17 grandkids. Why this one, right? And so being able to get a little bit more granular and feeling comfortable enough that you've been vulnerable and you've shared your why, because you know that 91% to 13% that I talked about earlier with the advisors, the number one thing was that the advisor didn't want to seem like they were showboating on why they gave. But of those 13% of the clients, half of them wished that remember the conversation, over half of them wish that the advisor had had the conversation before they had even signed the papers to become their clients, because it built so much rapport. So we really need to kind of dig into ourselves and be willing to walk our walk when it comes to the vulnerability of telling the story. So I know that that is not necessarily what the task was for a protagonist, but we'll move on. Now that we know who our protagonist is, we're going to talk about a cast of characters. So in my cast of characters that I talked about with that lady who wanted her family to come over, there was her family, there was someone in the kitchen that overheard the story, there was her manager. You really want it to look like a mirror of your protagonist. So they can be sidekicks, mentors, love interests, villains, victims, rescuers, magicians, a child, a family. These are all casts of characters that you can involve in your storytelling that can help reflect the protagonist's point of view. So if we take Cinderella, we have the sidekicks, of course. We have the rescuer, the fairy godmother. The feminist in me has a little bit of a problem with that, but we'll leave that there. We have, again, the love interest, the villains. So you can see how this all plays out. Disney does this very well. So now if we were going to go back to our workbook and we look at the cast of characters, we're a little out of order here, but we're going to go to the bottom here that says the cast of characters. If we can go in there, and if you think about your story, who's involved in your story that reflects the protagonist? And there's some questions here that will prompt you. How did your protagonist first meet each cast member that you want to think about? So I'm going to go back and just keep this list up here. There can be other casts of characters, but these are just some that we think about. Jump into the journey. So we really want to understand, where are we going? You know, the research scientist that searches for a cure, they're on a path. Where is that path going? The refugee that seeks a safe home for her family, the abandoned puppy who seeks a forever home. This really hits home because I'm a foster fail twice. A person with cancer who seeks healing. I know the Breast Cancer Foundation is here. So those are really compelling stories. And of course, we saw this a lot during the pandemic. The victims of domestic violence seek safety. So these are all paths that people are on, and these are all really compelling stories that we're able to kind of chart with our donors. So of course, when we go back to Disney, they like the yellow brick road. So if we go back to our workbook, we're going to kind of move through this a little bit quickly, and we're going to go into the journey. So if we can go back to this, maybe talk a little bit about the journey that you're going to be taking your donor on, or taking your protagonist on, I should say. So you can see that, again, there's some questions, and just take a moment to answer some of them and go back to your workbook. So this is where we actually start talking about what is in opposition of this person, this protagonist, achieving their journey. So what has happened? So if we go back to the story that I told earlier, the obstacle was having enough money to bring the entire family over. So how do you identify the obstacle that's going to be in front of you or in front of your protagonist? It's important to remember that a journey is a movement for the protagonist. There should always be a villain or an obstacle for the protagonist to combat. That tension is essential for people to want to root for the hero, to root for the magic. And that tension in the story creates intrigue, connection, and momentum. So just always remember those three things. And I know that everyone's taking pictures, but Shirley again told me that this will all be available. You can take them, and the PowerPoint will be there, everything will be there, but feel free to take pictures. So if everyone wants to jump back in and start looking at the journey and the key questions that are being asked, we'll come back and talk about that magic moment after. So we want to talk about the emotions and the senses. So these are the 4 primal elements of your emotions. So we want to understand, where do you want the person hearing your story to lie within this part of your story? So the emotions and senses are the thing that brings your story to life. You know, when I tell that story about the immigrant family, there's a good chance we're in Canada and a lot of people can relate. No matter where you come from, you can relate to that immigrant story of someone coming here trying to better a life for their family and future generations. That inspires you, it grounds you, it brings you back to your family. All of those moments of love, connection. So we want to think about the emotions that are connected to it. I don't know if anyone saw The Lion King, but just seeing this photo of Mufasa and Simba can literally bring me back to being a child and sitting in that movie theater watching it. It takes a great storyteller to do that, but more than anything, it brings us back to the human connection between you and your parent. Right? So what emotions are evoked in this when we think about it? So when you're telling your story, what is the emotion that you want to bring forward? So in your workbook, if we go to the emotions and the emotions and senses, you can read this and identify the 3 places of your story, like the climax, the introduction, the antagonist, and the ending, that you want to be able to fully describe their emotions. So go through some of these, and we can come back for that magic moment. So I really just want to kind of touch on the last couple of things. Has anyone ever listened to This American Life? It's a podcast. Yes, so Ira Glass is probably one of the most fantastic storytellers. You know, you get into a story, I think it was one time about the fixed price of milk in Chicago, and I was right there with him. You know, like, I don't really drink milk, but okay. But he said a great quote, and he said, "The story is a machine for empathy. In contrast to logic or reason, a story is about emotions that gets staged over a sequence of moments, so you empathize with the characters without really thinking about it too much. It is a powerful tool for imagining yourself in other people's situations." which is what we hope for a lot of us that our donors will be able to do when we tell our stories. So those moments of suspension disbelief. So have you ever sat in a movie theater and you feel your heart breaking for someone? You are in that story. You are no longer in your reality. You have just entered the writers, the directors, the actors' reality. And that suspension of disbelief is what creates the moment of connection. It's that magic moment that we all chase after. So, if you did all of the sections, we would have had our perfect story. And again, in the interest of time, we have the protagonist, we have our cast of characters, we have our journey, we have the nemesis or the antagonist that's in your workbooks, we have the emotions and senses, we have that magic moment, and we have the resolution. So how does this all come together? Whether it's Cinderella getting her glass slipper, if it's Simba and Nyla having their lion cub, those are all moments of resolution that people can feel safe with. The power of vulnerability is so crucial, and that's why I thanked you and I entered this presentation with gratitude, because everyone today came to share a story, to build a story that they can not only go home with, but they could take with them as they move forward. Maya Angelou might be one of my favorite women to have ever walked this earth, but she said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget the way you made them feel." So if I can bring you back to that ripple effect of that $1,878.18, I think I'm making these numbers up now. What if I told you that that woman was my mother? That woman in the Holiday Inn that was standing in the kitchen that got that $1,800 and some odd dollars for those 2 extra family members. The brother that she was able to bring over was the reason why I got to start my career in philanthropy. That all happened because someone overheard a story. So asking the questions of why is incredibly important. So I want to say thank you for being vulnerable with me. Thank you for sharing your stories. And if you need anything, I'm here.
La philanthropie détient le pouvoir de transformer des communautés entières et d'améliorer de façon significative la vie de millions de personnes. Un simple geste de bonté peut avoir des répercussions considérables sur la vie des gens. La Fondation communautaire juive de Montréal est fière d'inaugurer le Centre d'apprentissage philanthropique. A groundbreaking initiative that brings together professionals, donors, and charities to create a better future for generations to come. We're excited to have you embark on this journey to change the world through philanthropy. Over the next 12 months, we will invite you to highly curated events designed to inspire and give you the tools to reach your personal and organizational goals. Philanthropy is about coming together, making a difference, and shaping the world we live in. When you join the Center for Philanthropic Learning, you'll be part of a movement of people who share and care. That's smart philanthropy.